Hello, Tungsten Miner here. Today I thought I would do a Let's Play video about power generation at my base here. I've briefly kind of walked by these machines and maybe touched on them just a tiny bit, but I actually undertook a project recently to add an OpenComputers computer to control the reactor that I'm standing just in front of and make it so that the power generation is now pretty well fully automated in the base. So I thought this might be a good time to stop and talk about the system as a whole. Let's jump in. Okay, so when I first set up my very first base, I created this steam dynamo from thermal expansion. And the dynamos in general are pretty straightforward. Let's see here. Integration, reacting, compression, magnetic, and steam dynamos. So there's a bunch of different ones. Really what's different about them is what kind of fuel they use. So here we've got a steam dynamo, copper, iron, and a transmission coil, so a little bit of silver, which means this is a pretty cheap machine to make and very easy to use early on. I eventually moved on to a compression dynamo, which allows you to burn liquid fuels. So tin, iron, pretty much as easy to make, really. And that way, I've now got a system whereby I can use wood, charcoal, coal, ladders even, because you wind up with a lot of sticks when you're chopping down dynamic trees, so you can turn those into ladders and burn the ladders. Unfortunately, you can't burn the sticks directly. Anyway, so that gives you a way to dispose of excess burnable materials in a way that produces something useful, power. Same deal over here with these compression dynamos. Of course, at first, I'd go and find crude oil, and then I'd burn that, and then I made myself machines to refine that, and I could burn refined fuel and get a lot more power. Eventually, fuelium and get even more power from that. But these days, the fuelium is more valuable to me in my vehicles. So instead of burning the fuelium, I wind up burning creosote. So whenever I get a stack of wood that I don't need, I can toss it into a coke oven over there. That will slowly convert the wood into charcoal, and then I can take the creosote that comes out and burn that. So I can burn both the charcoal and the creosote and get double the power from that. So that works out pretty well. However, once you've got a lot of machines and you're doing a lot of stuff, you burn through that power pretty quickly. So I wound up adding in this reactor here. The way this works is, let me see here. Okay, so big reactors has a bunch of stuff in it, but what you need really to get started is this reactor casing. So you'll need some graphite. Graphite can be produced by smelting coal or charcoal, and that gets you a graphite bar. And this is just reactor casing, so a little bit of gold, a little bit of graphite, a little bit of iron, you get some of these blocks. That forms all of the blocks around the outside edges. The pattern they have right now is because the multi-block has been formed, and it changes the pattern, but really these are all just the same thing. And then here I have a power outlet, which is the power tap, this guy, redstone flux power tap. So you've got some redstone, reactor casings, and that gets you one of these guys. This, of course, is the reactor control unit itself, which is this guy. So a little bit of yellorium, diamond, more reactor casing. Over here, I added a computer port, and you can look up the recipe for that. And then finally, here is the output port in the back. So you take your reactor casings, go all the way around. There's 9 of them on the bottom there. Add in whatever ports you need in the controller around the sides. At the top here, I've got a control rod, which is one of these guys. Oh, where did it go? Here it is. So again, just substituting a piston out, and then finally a fuel rod, which is in the very middle of this big multi-block. So this is the simplest and smallest of the big reactors that you can create. It's the easiest thing you could do, the least materials, to start turning yellorium into power. Inside this controller here, we can see a bunch of different controls. Honestly, for the most part, for this stage of things, you can ignore pretty much all of this. This is the on button, this is the off button. Everything else you can turn on auto eject, and that works just fine. This tells you how much power you've got. This tells you the outside casing temperature and the core heat. These have to do with how quickly you burn up fuel and how efficiently you convert fuel to power. But neither one of those matters at the moment, because you're just going to turn the thing on, generate some power, and turn it back off again. So in the early days, you kind of don't have to pay attention to these. Once you start building bigger reactors, you'll want to optimize for these so that you're not burning up more fuel than you need to. And then finally, this just tells you how much fuel do you have in your reactor. So I've got one fuel rod, which can have 4 ingots, or 4,000 millibuckets, because it converts it to a liquid fuel. And then it slowly just converts it from fuel to waste. And if you have this auto eject waste turned on, your hatch in the back here will have ingots of waste material, cyanide, which comes out every time there's a full bucket's worth. It'll convert it to an ingot and drop it in here. And that's it. You put your fuel back here and off you go. However, it takes a while to fill up the internal buffer for this thing. So that's 10 million RF right there. And then I've also got this energy cell, which can hold 50 million RF hooked up to this. So that takes up a while to charge. And what I wound up doing is I'd turn this on whenever I was starting to get low on reserve power. And then I'd go do some stuff and I'd forget all about it. And I'd quit the game and leave it overnight. And I'd burn up half a stack of fuel for no benefit, because this energy meter would get full pretty quickly after I left the game. And then it would stay that way and keep burning fuel and keep burning fuel and keep burning fuel. And the power is just waste because there's nowhere to put it. So I decided I wanted to set things up so that that stopped happening to me. What I wound up doing is I made this OpenComputers computer, and this is going to be the main point of today's Let's Play video, is how did I go about doing this? So this is the end result, but it took quite a few steps to get to this point. So what I've got here is the simplest set of stuff that forms an actual OpenComputers computer. So this is a tier 1 computer case. Oh yeah, I don't want to have to try and find all this stuff for you. So let's computer case. And this is itself not super easy to make, right? Some of these components are obviously very accessible, but printed circuit board requires a raw circuit board. And at least in Astra, this mod pack I'm running, your silicon plate can be made from silicon ingots, which is made really from electric arc furnaces. So you kind of have to get into this to really get started with computer craft at all. Having done that, though, you also need a microchip, which requires a transistor, which requires a silicon plate. We just talked about that. So you kind of wind up having to build yourself a bunch of silicon to start building these pieces. Having a computer case, you also need some kind of graphics card, and the graphics card has its own card base and ALU and memory. All of these are using similar kinds of components that basically all come down to a little bit of silicon, a little bit of iron, a little bit of gold. And we've already looked at these. I think we've already looked at those. Yep. So this is the ALU, more transistors, more microchips. So it's worthwhile to just build a bunch of all of these microchips and transistors and basic components. Card bases, you tend to use a lot of these. Certainly these printed circuit boards use a lot of them. So it's worthwhile to build a bunch of these because you're going to keep coming back to recipes that call on them. And then that's your graphics card, your CPU, similar kind of stuff. Your hard drive, these disk platters are just some ingots. You've got your sticky pistons, more stuff. So none of this is super complicated, but it does require that you have silicon and that you have a pretty good supply of a lot of these microchips and things. Okay, so what are the pieces you need? Well, first you build the case. Then you make yourself a graphics card, a central processing unit, a hard drive, at least one stick of memory. However, this is very little memory, and it's only barely enough to run the operating system, and you'll probably find you can't even run your program. You certainly can't run the editor to edit your programs on this much memory. So I make 2 for a level 1. You will also need this EEPROM, and it has to be the Lua BIOS one because the regular one's just empty. So an EEPROM is just this recipe here. And then you combine that with the OpenComputers manual, which is just a microchip and a book. And that gets you the Lua version of an EEPROM. You can also copy these. So this is a little deceptive, but if I had, say, a Lua EEPROM and I combined it with an empty one, I'd get two Lua ones back again. So once you've made it the first time, it's pretty easy to keep making new ones. So once you've installed all of these things in your computer, it will actually start up and let you do things. However, I'm going to go walk over to my other computer and we'll continue the tutorial there because this is missing a bunch of parts that are also needed. Okay, here we are looking at my fancy computer. So I was talking about how I was making all level 1 components before. Well, this is a level 3 computer. So level 3 computer case. Inside the computer case, you can see part of being level 3 is that it's got more room for expansion. Level 3 graphics card, level 3 CPU, level 3 hard drive, level 3 memory, all of it level 3. The recipes are largely the same, except they use a tier 3 microchip, which uses diamond chips instead of iron nuggets, and it uses tier 3 memory, which is tier 3 microchips again. So everything will be pretty familiar when you go building your tier 2 and tier 3, just a lot more expensive because it's going to require diamonds and things. Same deal though, you need your EEPROM here, stick your memory in your hard drive. You don't technically need a hard drive. You can make a disk drive. So a tier 1 case doesn't have these 2 extra slots. One is for a floppy disk. So you need to make yourself an external drive, which is, not terribly difficult, but still requires silicon. And then the way that these OpenComputers blocks work is your case is kind of the center. And then dropping down a component where it's touching forms, in a sense, kind of a multi-block in that the computer case will look at adjacent blocks all around it and find the ones that are OpenComputers blocks that it recognizes. And that way it will be able to start interacting with them and working with them. So in this case, I've also got a tier 1 screen, which I was using at that other computer, and a keyboard. Keyboard is kind of funny. It's, you start looking at this like, oh yeah, that looks just like a keyboard. And these are literally just stone buttons. So you make yourself a whole bunch of stone buttons, 37 in all, and arrange them like this to make these different keyboard groups, which are exactly what you'd expect them to be. And you wind up with your little keyboard. You must have a keyboard, and it must be touching the screen component in order for this all to work. So I'm going to turn this thing on. And here it is starting to boot up. Since this is a level 3 computer, it's really fast compared to the other computers. But it's kind of slow compared to your actual desktop. So it's kind of somewhere in between. What we're looking at here is called OpenOS. It's a Unix-like interface. So the shell is vaguely kind of shell-like or bash-like. So you'll have the commands that you might expect. So I can list the directory. I can cd to a higher directory, list this directory. Going over all of what you can do in here is well beyond this video. So I'm not going to get too into this, except to note that you can go to the OpenComputers website and explains a lot of this stuff. And there's tutorials and things that you can use there to get started. So I'm going to go back to home. One thing though is that the level 1 computer does not have enough capacity to run this edit command, which is the text editor that comes with OpenOS. So you need to build yourself at least a level 2 computer, if not a level 3 computer, to be able to run this command. Okay, so what we're looking at now is the script that I wrote myself to control the reactor. I'm going to just walk through this line by line a little bit quickly, hopefully not too quickly and not too slowly, and talk about what it's doing. So this require component is pulling in a library, which allows you to deal with other blocks that might be accessible to your computer. And accessible, again, just means there's a block that OpenComputers recognizes that is somehow adjacent to the series of blocks that the case can find. And there's actually a network block that network cable block that you can create. that allows you to hook up your computer to something that it can't physically be exactly next to. And we'll see that when I go back to the reactor. So this line, local component equals required component, is connecting us to the library that allows us to find other blocks. Okay, so here I'm saying if I can't find the BR reactor component, which is to say the computer port block that I've got installed in my reactor, if that thing is not somehow connected either by cables or directly adjacent to the computer, then I want to print out a message saying couldn't find the reactor, and then I want to shut down my program. Because there's no reactor, there's no point in running the reactor control script. Anytime you open an if-then block, you need to have n to tell the programming language I'm done with this little piece. Okay, local term equals required term. So term is another one of these libraries that allows you to control what's visible on the screen. So I just want to clear the screen at this point. Now I'm going to say I found the reactor, because I did, and then I'm going to start monitoring levels. Great. So here, component.brReactor allows me to grab a programming object that I can use to manipulate the reactor itself. So component, remember I pulled in on that very first line, it has all of these properties attached to it, which are all the components that it was able to find. So now I've got a reactor component I can start working with to change what the reactor is doing. Here, I'm interrogating that reactor and saying, give me all the information about the energy you have. And that gives me back another little object which has its own set of properties. And the one I'm interested in the moment is how much capacity does the reactor have? So what internal storage does it have? In my case, this is going to return the number 10 million, but I want this to work for reactors that might have different energy storage, so I'm not making any assumptions here. And then here, I want to say, am I currently in the process of charging up the internal storage, or am I in the process of letting it wind down? What I don't want to do is keep flipping the reactor on and off really quickly. So once the reactor gets empty, I want to turn the reactor on and leave it on until it gets all the way up past 90%. And that's what the whole rest of the program is all about. And once it's gotten past 90%, I want to turn the reactor off and leave it off until it gets all the way below 0% again. What I don't want to do is have it get below 90% and say, uh-oh, I'm running out of juice, I'm going to turn the reactor on. But it's at like 89.99%. And it turns it on for a half a second and then says, oh, okay, I'm above 90% again, I'm going to turn it right off. It's just going to toggle above that, around that, that limit really quickly. And I don't want that to happen. So here I'm keeping track of whether I'm on the downward or upward trajectory. So while true, do this thing forever. It's possible to interrupt a program by holding down Control, Option, and then C, and that will cancel your program. So when your computer starts up and starts running your control software, you can get out of it to manipulate the computer and fix things by pressing that keyboard combination. So here, the first thing I'm going to do inside the loop is interrogate the reactor and ask it, how much energy do you currently have stored? Then I'm going to say, okay, well, am I on the recharging side or the discharging side? If I'm recharging, then I want to check, have I arrived at the point where I want to shut this thing off? So if my stored power is greater than 90% of my max capacity, and that's just a number I picked out of my head, then I want to say, here's what's going on. I'm going to shut this thing off. I'm going to shut it off and remember that I shut it off. If I'm not above that level yet, then I just want to put a little message saying, I'm still working. Things are okay. This is working as normal. Nothing to worry about here. So I print a little message saying we're still recharging and here's the power level that we're currently at. If we're not recharging, so if the reactor were powered off and it's currently pulling down power from its battery, then I've got a different set of logic that I want to use. Here, I'm going to say, if we have completely discharged the internal buffer in the reactor, then I want to turn the thing on. So I'm going to put a message saying, here's what's going on. I'm going to remember that we're recharging, and then I'm going to say to the reactor, turn yourself on. And that's what this set active does. If the power level is still above 0, and I'm in the discharging state, that means I've still got some power and I'm just waiting for things to, trickle down before I do anything. So I'm going to print a message that I'm not doing anything and I don't intend to do anything. And by the way, here's what the current power level is. And then at the end is, I don't want the computer to be constantly working. That I think uses more power, but it also is just going to keep the server real busy running this computer all the time, doing needless checks. So I have it sleep for 30 seconds between checks. So it'll do this when it gets to the end. It's just going to pop right back up to the beginning of the loop here. Yeah, a little too far there, cursor. Going to pop right up to the beginning of this loop and then just start this whole sequence of things again. When I want to get out of here, I can press Control W, and that gets me out of this guy. Okay, so that's how I developed the program. What I then did was I stuck this disk in the disk drive, and I said, copy my reactor program to where disks get mounted. And I happen to remember that this is disk 06, and I want it to be called reactor control over there. I've already got this on the disk, so I'm just going to copy over it, say, yep, I want to overwrite. And now it's copied onto that disk. And if I cd to mount D06 and list directory, we can see, sure enough, there's my reactor control.lua in there. So cd back home again. And I'm going to grab the disk out, and I'm going to turn this guy off because I don't want to waste the power. I'm not at a point now where I've got renewable power set up, so I don't want to burn through all my fuel when I happen to be away and not playing the game. So over here, we're back to the reactor room. Here's my little computer. So if I take my screen and pop it up there, the next time it gets to the bottom of the loop and prints a message, we'll see it show up on the screen. It's black now because it doesn't pick up the history of what has been shown on the screen. There we go, not recharging. So I can take my keyboard and pop that on the side of the screen, click on this, and I'll interrupt my program. It gets a little angry about that. That's fine. So first thing you'll notice, this is a tier 1 computer. The screen is tiny because it has a very limited capacity graphics card. We can also see it's got very little RAM compared to the other one. Well, that's because it's got tier 1 RAM in there. But if I list my directory, oh, I'm in my home directory. Yeah. So dir is a command that's much simpler than ls. It doesn't try to do as much for you. It shows you the files, but without a lot of extra information, which ls does give you. On this computer, I'm not even sure I've got enough RAM to run ls properly. Okay, I guess I do, just barely. What we notice is that in addition to all of the other stuff we saw on the other computer, there's this one extra file, autorun.lua. This is actually my reactor control script, just named differently. It's the same content. And so the way that I got this in here is I put the disk drive right next to the computer, which I forgot to bring with me, but that's okay. You can imagine I've popped it right here. And then I put the disk in there, and then I just copied the file off the disk onto this machine, renaming it to autorun.lua in the process. What that means is that when I restart this machine, so I'll turn it off, turn it back on again, the machine boots up, and when it gets to the end of the boot process, the next thing it does is looks for a file that's at the root of the file system named autorun.lua, and then it executes that script. Okay, so that's where it got to. And you remember there was a line in there that cleared the screen, so it got rid of all the other stuff, and then it printed out if it was able to find the reactor. Obviously it was. And it's checked the state of the reactor. The reactor is turned off, so it's in the not charging mode. It's in the discharging mode. And now it's telling us you've got 26% power. And it's just going to wait until that discharges every 30 seconds. It's just going to make another little pass and check again. Not charging. Okay, this over here is the cable that I was talking about. So I've got, this is the computer control port on the reactor. This is just a data cable. So if we look over here, we can see cable, redstone with some iron nuggets, and you get 4 of them. So very, very cheap. Cable comes around and it kind of notices that there's a computer here and changes its shape to look like it's connected. So the computer now considers this block adjacent and that block adjacent and that block adjacent and this one, and then finally this one. Because this cable is really the same connectivity as saying I've got this screen on top of the computer. Since it's adjacent to the computer can find it. And the cable is just a no-op block. It doesn't do anything other than serve as a bridge to go find other things. So I could run cables all around my base to connect to all sorts of other devices and have them all run back to one computer. And someday I might even do that. But for now, I just decided to put the computer pretty close to the reactor itself. The other thing, of course, is that computers require power. So here I've got this connected directly to my main base battery. And the other computer has power coming in from under the floor that you can't quite see. But that's kind of it. So I've got my big reactors reactor, just the very simplest one to get started with, generate a little power. I've got a tier 1 computer with all of its various components installed. And I've got a program that I wrote that just very simply says if the thing is full, turn it off. If it's empty, turn it back on again and keep an eye on it so that when I walk away from the game, it manages the power on its own and doesn't waste a bunch of fuel. So that's my automated power control system. Talk to you later.